My name is David Carter, and after more than 15 years of loyalty, I thought I had seen everything a company could throw at me. But nothing prepared me for what happened just 24 hours before I was due to receive my $87,000 bonus. It wasn't the market collapsing, or a project failing, or even a bad year for sales. No, it was something far more personal and humiliating. I was called into the CEO's office only to find his wife sitting behind the desk with a stack of papers already prepared. She didn't bother with small talk, didn't even thank me for my years of service. She simply looked at me, smirked, and said, "Your time here is over. We'll save plenty by moving on without you." And just like that, a decade and a half of work, loyalty, and sacrifice was reduced to a cost-cutting line on a spreadsheet. I walked out of that room stripped of my title, my dignity, and the bonus I had worked so hard to earn. But here's the part she didn't know. The part that turned her smug little victory into a catastrophic mistake. For years, I had quietly protected something the company relied on more than anything else: the patents. The very innovations she thought she was freeing herself from still had my name on them. So while she was celebrating her cost savings, I was preparing to show her just how costly arrogance can be. One overlooked detail in a sea of paperwork was about to transform her $87,000 win into a $40 million disaster. This is the story of how being underestimated became my greatest advantage, and how silence turned into the most powerful revenge I could have imagined. Before I begin, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and in the comments tell me where you're watching from. I'm 46 years old, and for most of my adult life, I lived inside the walls of that company. I started as a junior engineer, fresh out of school, with nothing but a degree, a toolbox, and a willingness to outwork anyone in the room. Back then, the company wasn't the polished, high-rise corporation it pretends to be now. It was scrappy, unstable, and desperate to survive. I poured myself into it anyway because I believed in what we were building. 15 years passed in what felt like a blur. I was the guy people called when systems broke at midnight, when deadlines threatened to crush entire teams, when a client was about to walk away. I didn't complain, I didn't ask for recognition. I just did the work. Over the years, I built things that lasted, products that carried our reputation, processes that saved millions, patents that would one day define the company's future. I missed dinners, vacations, even milestones at home. My daughter once asked why I worked so much, and I told her, because if I don't, none of this survives. It wasn't just a job to me, it was a commitment, a belief that loyalty meant something, and for a while it did. The old leadership valued consistency and experience. But when the new CEO took over, and when his wife began to exert her influence, everything changed. Suddenly, my steady, deliberate approach wasn't seen as strength. It was too expensive, too slow, too traditional. Still, I kept going. I trained younger hires, I patched their mistakes. I made sure projects landed on time. I told myself loyalty would be recognized, that all the years I gave would eventually matter. I was wrong. And the cruelest part? It wasn't the company that pushed me out. It was the CEO's wife, someone who hadn't built a single thing I had spent years protecting. To her, I wasn't a person. I was just a salary to slash. When I look back at the beginning, I almost laugh at how rough things were. Our office wasn't some shiny tower in the middle of the city. It was a drafty old building with flickering fluorescent lights, second-hand desks, and computers that crashed more often than they worked. We were a team of dreamers more than professionals, and survival was never guaranteed. But I believed in it. I believed in what we were trying to build, and I gave everything I had to make sure we succeeded. I became known as the guy who could fix the impossible. If a prototype failed, I stayed overnight until it worked. If a deadline was closing in, I skipped weekends and holidays to push it across the finish line. My hands, my mind, my time, they were all invested in that place. Clients who once threatened to leave ended up shaking my hand because I personally made sure their needs were met. That kind of commitment doesn't show up on spreadsheets, but it's what kept the company alive. Along the way, I started filing patents. At first, it was just part of the job, documenting innovations, protecting our designs, making sure no one else could claim credit. But over the years, those patents multiplied. They weren't just technical papers. They were the backbone of entire product lines. Some of the company's most profitable years came directly from technology I had designed and protected, and my name was right there on every single one. I didn't flaunt it. I wasn't the type to pound my chest or demand recognition. I preferred being in the background, letting the work speak for itself. My colleagues knew I was reliable, steady, maybe even too quiet, but they also knew that when things went wrong, I was the one who found solutions. Things started to shift when the new CEO arrived. He wasn't from the industry. He was a numbers guy, smooth talker, always ready with a buzzword. At first I thought maybe he'd bring fresh ideas, but it quickly became clear his priorities were different. To him, experience was overhead. Loyalty was stagnation. And then there was his wife. She didn't hold an official role, but everyone knew she was pulling strings. Decisions that once came from the boardroom suddenly seemed to come from her whispers. She liked to talk about cutting fat and streamlining, and I could feel her eyes on me in meetings, as if I was nothing more than a costly relic. Despite the shift, I kept my head down. I trained the new hires, even when they looked at me like I was outdated. I fixed their mistakes quietly, just to keep the projects moving. I told myself the truth mattered, that my work, my patents, my contributions would speak louder than their arrogance. I even convinced myself that my bonus, the $87,000 I was due after another year of relentless effort, was proof that loyalty still had value. It wasn't just money. It was acknowledgement, a small piece of respect for everything I had poured into that company. But I was blind. I didn't see what was coming. The CEO's wife had already decided that I wasn't an asset to protect. In her eyes, I was a cost to cut. And when she finally acted, it wasn't with respect or even regret. It was with a smirk, the kind of smirk that told me she thought she'd won. That moment was the turning point, the spark that would light everything that followed. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day when most people are already thinking about the weekend. For me, it should have been a milestone, just 24 hours away from the $87,000 bonus I had worked an entire year to earn. I'd already promised my wife we'd finally renovate the kitchen, something she had patiently waited for while I kept saying, next year after things settle. But instead of congratulations, I was called into the CEO's office. When I walked in, I froze for a moment. He wasn't there. His wife was sitting in his chair behind his desk, like she owned the place. A thin folder sat in front of her, neatly closed, as if the decision had already been signed and sealed before I even walked through the door. She didn't waste time. "David," she said, her voice smooth but sharp, "your services are no longer required. We've decided it's best to move the company forward without you." I blinked, stunned. Without me? After 15 years? Her lips curved into that smirk I'd seen too many times in meetings. "You've had a good run, but we need leaner, fresher talent. And frankly, you're expensive. That was her word for me. Not loyal, not valuable, just expensive. I wanted to argue, to list the patents, the late nights, the projects that had saved us millions. But I didn't. I knew it wouldn't matter. She wasn't here to listen. She was here to erase me. When I stepped out of that office, the humiliation deepened. My colleagues avoided my eyes. Some whispered. A few even chuckled nervously, as if my downfall was entertainment. No one spoke up. No one said goodbye. I walked out carrying nothing but the knowledge that after everything I had given, I had been discarded like old furniture. And to make it sting even more, I knew I was only a day away from the bonus I had already earned. But as painful as that moment was, I kept my face calm. Because while she thought she had won, I knew something she didn't. Something buried in a stack of documents she had never bothered to read. Something that would turn her victory into a disaster. The hours after my firing felt like moving through fog. I drove home with the same box every discarded employee carries. A few framed photos, a mug my daughter painted for me years ago, and the hollow weight of humiliation pressing down on me. My wife met me at the door, searching my face before I even spoke. She didn't need to ask. She knew. That night we sat at the kitchen table in silence. She asked only one question. Why? I didn't have a simple answer. How do you explain arrogance? How do you put into words that you've been erased, not because of failure, but because someone wanted to prove they had power? The next morning, the whispers began. My phone buzzed with messages, not from friends offering comfort, but from colleagues who suddenly remembered me only as gossip. One said, "Tough break, man. Heard they wanted new blood." Another wrote, "She called you too expensive." Expensive. That word again echoing like a curse. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt something colder. Disappointment. After 15 years, that was my legacy. A number on a spreadsheet. But inside that disappointment, a spark began to grow. Because I remembered something they had forgotten. Late that night, I unlocked the old file cabinet in my study. It was packed with documents from every stage of my career. Contracts, agreements, and most importantly, patents. I pulled out one thick folder labeled Proprietary Systems, Carter. Dust clung to its edges, but the words inside were sharp as ever. Page after page carried my name. Not the company's, mine. These patents weren't just technical jargon. They were the foundation of entire product lines. The same ones still driving millions in revenue every quarter. And then I found it, a clause from my original contract. Buried deep where no one bothered to look. It stated that if I left the company under conditions deemed unjust or without merit, ownership of the patents I had filed remained fully with me, unless renegotiated in writing. No such renegotiation had ever taken place. They had forgotten. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. While the CEO's wife smirked at her supposed cost savings, she had unknowingly handed me back control of the very patents the company couldn't survive without. Her victory wasn't just short-sighted, it was suicidal. Still, I didn't storm back into the office waving papers. I've never believed in shouting battles. I believe in patience, quiet moves, the kind of preparation arrogance never sees coming. So I called a lawyer I trusted, a man I'd worked with years before. When I explained the situation, he paused only long enough to say, "They're in trouble. Sit tight, and we'll confirm everything." Over the next week, I stayed silent while the office buzzed with news of my firing. I heard she bragged in meetings about how much money she'd saved by cutting me. I heard my name used as a warning. Don't be like David. Too slow, too expensive, too traditional. I smiled quietly at each rumor, because while they laughed, I was building my case. My lawyer confirmed every detail. The patents were still mine, the clause airtight. Without me, their core products were vulnerable. Their empire was built on my foundation. Each day that passed, my anger faded, replaced by a strange calm. They thought they had erased me, but I had been here before, staying up late in empty labs, fixing problems no one else could fix. This time the problem wasn't a broken prototype, it was arrogance. And I knew exactly how to solve it. By the time the next board meeting was scheduled, my plan was set. I wasn't going to yell or demand apologies. I was going to walk into that room, place my folder on the table, and let the truth speak for itself. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet document, patiently waiting for the right moment. And mine was coming sooner than they thought. The day of the board meeting arrived, and with it, the moment I had been preparing for in silence. I wore a plain dark suit, not flashy, not new, but steady, like me. As I walked through the familiar hallways, I could feel the stares. Some employees smirked, others looked away quickly, pretending not to notice me. They thought I was a ghost, returning to the place I no longer belonged. In a way, they were right. But ghosts have a way of haunting those who think they've buried them. I pushed open the doors to the boardroom, and the chatter fell silent. The long table stretched before me, lined with directors, each flipping through their notes. At the far end sat the CEO's wife, perfectly composed, lips curved in the same smirk I had seen the day she fired me. "David," she said coolly, as if my presence was an inconvenience, "this is a closed session." I placed the thick folder of documents on the polished wood table and slid it toward the chairman of the board. My voice was calm. "Actually, this concerns the very foundation of the company. I suggest you read it before continuing." The room shifted as the chairman opened the folder. Page after page revealed patent after patent, each bearing my name as owner. The directors leaned in, whispering, confusion spreading like wildfire. My lawyer, seated quietly beside me, cleared his throat and read aloud the clause confirming my ownership, the clause they had ignored when they pushed me out. The CEO's wife's smile faltered. This can't be right. Those patents belong to the company." I met her gaze steadily. "No, they belong to me. You fired me without merit, without renegotiation. That triggered this clause. And now every product line tied to those patents, the ones driving your revenue, is mine to control." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The weight of $40 million hovered in the air. One director muttered, "My God." Another pushed back his chair, staring at her in disbelief, her face drained of color. She looked around desperately, but no one defended her. The smirk was gone, replaced by panic. She had played her game carelessly, and now the cost was clear for everyone to see. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply leaned forward and said, "You thought I was replaceable. What you forgot is that you built this house on my foundation, and without me it all collapses." The chairman closed the folder and folded his hands. His expression was grim but decisive. "This meeting will continue, but not under your leadership," he said, turning to her. "You've cost us too much already." And in that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. The rest of that meeting unfolded like a slow unraveling of her authority. She tried to recover, raising her voice, insisting the documents were outdated, twisting her words to frame me as bitter or vengeful. But the directors weren't buying it. Their faces told the story, not anger at me, but at her reckless arrogance. By the time the chairman called for order, her protests had become background noise. What mattered was the proof in front of them. The patents, the clause, the undeniable truth that the company's foundation didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. I sat quietly, saying little more. I didn't need to. Every page of that folder spoke louder than I ever could, and in silence I watched her realize she was powerless. The same woman who smirked when she ended my career now sat pale and shaken, her confidence crumbling in real time. When the meeting adjourned, no one looked at her. No one rushed to defend her decisions. Some directors shook my hand on the way out. Others simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that they knew the truth now. I walked through the building one last time, but this time the whispers felt different. There were no chuckles, no smirks, just wide eyes and hushed voices. Did you hear? David owns everything. The story of my humiliation was being replaced by the story of her downfall, and I didn't leave with bitterness. I left with dignity. My box of belongings was still waiting at home, but I no longer saw it as a symbol of failure. It was a reminder of everything I had built, and the leverage they never saw coming. I stepped out into the cool evening air, calm, steady, and free. That night, I sat at home in the same leather chair where I had spent countless late hours reviewing designs and contracts. But for the first time in years, I wasn't buried in work. I was simply present, with my wife, with my daughter, with myself. My wife looked at me across the table, her eyes soft with relief. "Are you angry?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. I expected to be. After all, they had humiliated me, stripped me of my bonus, and laughed at my loyalty. But instead I felt something entirely different. Peace. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not angry. I'm relieved." The truth was, I had spent too many years giving everything to a company that didn't value me. And when they tried to erase me, they only reminded me of the power I had carried all along. Those patents weren't just legal documents. They were proof of every late night, every sacrifice, every ounce of loyalty I had invested. Proof they couldn't take away. The $87,000 bonus I lost felt small compared to the $40 million they had thrown away with their arrogance. But more than money, what I gained was something far greater. Respect. Theirs, yes, but more importantly, my own. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that arrogance always underestimates preparation. They thought loyalty made me weak, that years of service meant I could be discarded without consequence. What they never realized was that real strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest or sitting in the highest chair. It comes from the quiet work, the careful planning, and the foundations you build when no one is watching. My story isn't just about a bonus or patents. It's about remembering your own worth, even when others try to erase it. I stayed calm when I could have shouted. I waited when I could have acted rashly. And in the end, patience turned out to be my sharpest weapon. So if you've ever felt overlooked, humiliated, or betrayed at work, remember this: preparation is power. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting the truth surface when the time is right. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful workplace stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I always enjoy knowing how far these stories reach. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful workplace stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know.